So thanks for having me here. I want to assure you that I'm going to give you a layperson's view of data and data analysis, primarily because it involves a lot of math. And Math and I, we had a great relationship through grade 8. Early high school, our relationship fell on the rocks significantly. We divorced at grade 12. We remain amicable, but very much a layperson's perspective. I have had the chance, though, to work with organizations around the country on workplace health programs and evaluation of those programs. So I hope to share a little bit of that with you. Now, when we talk about data, we're talking really about points of information, which have been around forever. So we can assume that analysis of data has also been around forever. But indulge me if you will. Let's take a brief tour through the history of data analysis. Okay, so let's get right to 1970, because before then, as far as I can tell, we were just trying to get computers to fit into one room. In 1997, what we saw was a group of sort of the statisticians, as they were known to that point in time. What we saw was the creation of an association that brought these people together and the emerging sort of power of computers to focus or refocus around, let's call it data analytics, how to use that data for insights. So in other words, we're talking good 40 years that this has been around. Now in the 80s, we saw, in addition to the advent of this surly cashier, we saw checkout scanners, right? And tremendous amount of information, of data being captured. So I think we concurrently saw the first organizations completely overwhelmed with the amount of data that they were collecting. And really nothing else happened in the 80s because no one could see through their hair. By the 1990s, we saw database marketing, right? And that question that's still being asked today, could I have your postal code, please? What the heck? Are you trying to hit on me? Or are you going to rob my house? What's going on here? This kind of sinister question. I'm just trying to buy some gum. So that was the 1990s. If we skip ahead to more recently, I think this gentleman captured it. You know, we're talking about using computers in creative ways to ultimately look at the data that's available, analyze it, and solve problems, okay? So that's what we're doing today with data. As we think of your workplaces, as we think of health-related data, I kind of picture it as a stream of water that's constantly flowing by, right? So you've got health data on individuals that's constantly flowing by, and from an evaluation perspective, I kind of picture it as diverting some of that stream into a insight generation station. That's the technical term. And sometimes it's a rudimentary station. You look at aggregate data, you look at population level, who's participating, or how many, I should say, are participating. What percentage of people are at risk or not at risk. But as the power of computers has increased, as the level or sophistication of questions has increased, we see organizations now interested in much more sophisticated insight generation stations or evaluation of their health data. So why don't we focus then on three main areas as we look at what has been to date and what is sort of coming. And I'll focus on context, sort of analytic tools that are used to bring context to health-related data. We can talk a bit about building the business case, and we'll talk a bit about how do you assess impact of these types of health programs. So first of all, from a context perspective, the old way of looking at things was essentially benchmarking, right? How does my organization compare to a similar organization down the street? The problem is that organization down the street might have more females, more males, might have more younger people, might have older people. The challenge with that is we know that different people claim at different rates, right? A 20-year-old male is going to claim very differently from a 40-year-old male. It's going to claim differently from a 60-year-old male, right? So why don't we compare 20-year-old males to 20-year-old males and 40-year-olds to 40-year-olds and men to men and women to women? Where I'm going with this is ultimately when we look at your organization and the costs that you're incurring, the claims that you're incurring, maybe a more relevant benchmark is to look at how those claims compare to what we should expect to see given the number of males and females in different age groups within your organization. And if we do that, what we're able to look at is, are you at what we would have expected to see? Are you incurring lower claims, higher claims costs than we would have expected to see? And we start to be able to answer some key questions. So mental health, for example, maybe that's your number one cost, but maybe that's in line with what we would have expected to see given your population. Okay, so it starts to drive priorities in programming as well. It's also a useful evaluation tool, right? Did we save money on a dollar-by-dollar basis? No, but did we reduce the gap between what we would have expected to see and where you were? Maybe that's one metric that would be worth tracking. Now, second one, around business case, building a business case. There's some value in acknowledging that you could do nothing, but there's a cost to doing nothing. So let's establish what that cost might be. We can take claims over a period of time and project that forward. We can add into that, adjust those numbers by events that we can anticipate or changes in your population and get essentially a cost of doing nothing. So that against that we can measure, well, hey, if we actually invest in a program and we know the types of return that we can anticipate, what would the cost of something be? And we can look at, hey, if we put some money into this program and we factor in the return that we're going to get, what sort of savings can we anticipate over time? So evolving that business case conversation with actual numbers based on your organization that your leadership can buy into. I think that's what we're starting to see for many organizations. Now, this idea of impact, let's talk a little bit about that. One of the things that I think challenges many organizations is getting a report that says, hey, 30% of your people are at high risk this year. And what we know is that that's different from last year. Okay? Let's say last year it was 50%. Well, now my challenge is, are those the same people or are those different people? Right? If they're different people, now I have a whole different part of the population that's at risk. So being able to track by individual their migration of risk becomes awfully important. D. Eddington, this is the shock and awe slide, by the way. So this is D. Eddington's research, not my research. What he showed, the takeaway from this is that if you look at an individual at 2 points in time, some of them will be at the same level of risk, some will have moved to better risk, some will have gotten worse. And there's a whole conversation we can have while we're walking and having lunch and stuff. But the point that I want to make here is, ultimately, where workplace health programs need to go, if we agree that this level of insight is important to have, is to understand the individual, right? To understand if you want to see how my health behaviors, for example, influence my health status. If you want to see how my health status starts to influence my short-term disability or long-term disability rates, how that impacts on my consumption of medications through the benefits plan, or engagement, or other business metrics, well, we have to get down to this individual level of data, right? And through that, we also have to deal with the fact that you probably have multiple providers providing this information. There's multiple data points that we have to attach together. But when we can do this, when we can see the link between these data points, we start to be able to get some great insights, and we start to be able to focus in on programming that can drive change. Let me give you an example from an organization that went down this path of the type of insights that you would be able to get. So what they were asking was, can this program help to improve health, and can it help to save some costs? What we looked at was participants in a wellness program over time and compared them to non-participants. Here's what we saw. We saw at time 1 and time 2 a change in the actual cost of benefits for these two groups. While costs didn't go down for participants, what we saw was that the rate of increase was less than half the rate of non-participants. So there's something in this wellness program that was helping to keep participants healthier than non-participants and incurring lower claims costs. For many organizations, that's kind of the holy grail, right? That's the sort of insight that, at least in Canada, we haven't typically seen to date, but I think is kind of an indicator of where things are going. From a health perspective, we saw for those who were at high risk and moved to low risk, savings as well, almost a 10% decline in costs. You can also start to look at, well, of those participants, what did they participate in? How did they create this outcome? You can start to look at which programs did they participate in that produced this change, right? Now you can start to redirect your investment to the most effective parts of the program. So these are the sorts of insights that I think we can expect to see for organizations going down this path of data and analysis. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that's great from sort of an evaluation perspective, but what about what's in it for the employees? From a programming perspective, I think there's a big difference between how you'd want to talk to participants versus non-participants. Or maybe you have in the middle occasional participants. Being able to target programming at those at highest risk, right? Being able to target your messaging. You're going to speak differently to someone who was a participant and now is not so much versus someone who never was but now just participated in their first one. So the ability to target programming, segment messaging, also becomes a great sort of byproduct of going down the path of more individualized programming. Okay. Now, what could go wrong, right? Some people are nervous about sharing their data. I don't know if you can read that from there. Your recent Amazon purchases, tweet score, and location history makes you 23.5% welcome here, right? So some people are nervous about sharing their data. Fair enough. And to do this, to get to individual level of data, what you really require from people is their consent. Okay? And we can have a whole conversation, might take more than 9 minutes, around how to do that. But a couple of takeaways, I think. One is having programs be at arm's length helps reassure people that the employer is not going to use this data directly. Okay? Having your providers play an active role would be one way to do that. Making sure that you communicate the value. What's in it for me? Have you looked at what you sign off on your iPhone? Right? The privacy that you, so I see a whole bunch of you go, no, should I have? When you look at that, there's a lot that you're giving up from a consent perspective, but you're getting back a lot of value. And I think that also speaks to the last piece, which is around the experience that we build in these programs for participants in return for their consent to participate. So maybe just to wrap up, let me focus on a couple of things to leave you with. First would be, what questions are you trying to answer? You don't need a massive power station if you're trying to answer simple questions. But for organizations that are interested in getting to this level, it's important to focus on which questions you're trying to answer. The second piece would be, so to answer those questions, what data do I need? Who else do I need to engage from my internally as well as external partners and providers as well? And third would be just be assured that as you look across the marketplace, many of your partners, many of your providers out there are thinking about these things, and it's worth challenging them as you start to build your insight generation station. Thank you.